Hi, welcome to Building SaaS with Python and Django. My name is Matt Lehman, and on this stream, we work on building web applications using Python and the Django web framework. Tonight, we're going to start on a brand new project, and I'm going to walk you through my thought process here for how to do that, the tech I'm going to use, and what the project is, and why I'm doing it, and all of that stuff. So stick around. If you want to, you certainly can ask me anything about Python, Django, or web development. That's what I'm here for. Please keep the chat polite if you can. I will boot you if you can't. And if you like what you see, like, comment, subscribe, interact with me outside of the live stream, and I'd be happy to do that as well. So let's get to it. I am starting a new project. We're going to start from scratch. So if this is your first time working on Django stuff, I can't promise I will go slowly, but I will show you as much as I can from the very beginning so you can see what it takes to put a project on the web. I'm going to talk about the goals of the project and what I'm going to do, and then we'll get to the actual code and get right down to it. So I've got an Excalidraw here that we can actually do a little bit of diagramming and put it in some notes. Let's start with that though. So what are we doing? I am building a new SaaS service. Well, that's redundant. A new software as a service. And what is it? It's an online journaling tool. There are some unique, maybe not so unique. It's actually going to be a clone of a tool that I currently use. So here's my scenario. I had a tool that I love and use and have used for a long time, but it was having some reliability issues this month. And even though it is now operational again, it was down for like a third of the month. And this is a journal. This is a daily journal that I want to use. So that meant that is a good chunk of the month that I could not journal easily and record all of my thoughts. So I can go do that kind of retroactively, but it's not great. So I thought, well, this is a pretty simple service conceptually. Let's see if I can create this myself. And it would give us a new project to focus on that has a simple domain, so it's easy to communicate. My normal project that I do on this stream is all about homeschooling, which is a complex ecosystem of all of the stuff that you need for scheduling. And so this will be a simple project that should be easier to understand and show you the concepts that I want to show you when it comes to working with Django. So here's the core ideas that go along with this journaling service. The main thing is it needs to be very easy to journal. And any site that you have to go to on a habitual basis, I suppose there are sites that you might do that for, whether it be Twitter or pick your social media poison, and you might do that. But when it comes to journaling, you might not be as inclined to do that. So the way that I want this service to work is that the primary interface is actually not going to be the Django app at all. Instead, it's going to use email. And the idea behind it is every day I will, and any user will get an email with a prompt saying, how was your day, more or less. And there's a unique hook about the service that I was using and what this service will be. What I found with journaling is that it's hard to stay motivated to do that. So the unique hook that makes this particular journaling concept nice is that every time I get one of these emails, it will include a random previous entry. And this is actually really awesome. So the service I've been using, I've literally been using it since 2014, I think. So it has 7 years of data at this point. And it's a really cool trip down memory lane. Every time I open one of these emails, it will show me a random date and it says, hey, on this day you wrote, and then I can read through and see what I was thinking about, what I was feeling, what was I working on. All of those kind of things are included. And so it's an inspiration to keep going because it's encouragement that, oh, I can see my journey in life. I can get a little glimpse into my past and be connected with who I was as a person back then. And I think if you're working with another journaling software or a regular journal, I'm going to guess that you maybe don't review older entries regularly. Maybe you're not a journaler at all, but I am, and I think that other journalers would probably appreciate being able to be reminded about their history. So that's kind of the crux of this tool. There's really not a lot to it beyond that. So it needs to work well with email, and it needs to provide all of the necessities for creating accounts and doing all of that. So let's talk about the pieces that are going to be in play here. So I am going to use Django. So let's get out of this little text input here. And so let's start drawing a few boxes that just kind of will frame what this is going to be. So we're going to use Django. Django will be the web application. And it'll be where all of the logic lives. Everything that needs to happen will happen with Django. I'm going to take my Django application and I'm going to deploy it to a hosting provider. The hosting provider that I will plan to use, although I guess Excalibur doesn't really do this very well. So let me put it down here and then I'll put it in the background. So I'm going to use Heroku, and then we can take. Whoops, that was not what I thought it was going to be. Not quite the diagramming start that I wanted to get. So I'm going to use Heroku, and we can put that over here and say the Django app is going to basically live inside of Heroku as the cloud platform. Heroku is going to be connected to a domain name. So you would have, I'm not going to share the domain because I don't want anybody snagging it. I've got a domain in mind, but I'm going to go to a domain registrar and connect in to connect with a registrar. So that would be a DNS, domain name service registrar. This is where you would go to set what your domain name is going to be mywebsite.com, and then that will be connected at the excuse me, wrong key, at the DNS record level to whatever my name is that is assigned to my application with Heroku. Okay, so that's the core of how the website will be exposed and available to the public. So when you, as a visitor, go to mywebsite.com, it will go to the DNS registrar and the DNS name system, or I guess it's not at the registrar at that point, but this is how you get the name initially. So it'll go into the DNS system, it'll do a lookup, and then route the traffic to Heroku, which will then respond to any HTTP requests. And that's able to do that because the Django is going to be listening and handling all of that HTTP web traffic. Okay, so that is not like the rocket science elements of this thing. And I guess I should add that, oh, silly thing, come on, send to back. Let me drag around. I want to drag around the Django box, but it won't let me. All right, now, there we go. This is not truly a representative equation. So let me do another box and we'll get this actually kind of structured the right way. So Django is the web framework and can handle HTTP requests, but it is not on its own a web server. Instead, what we'll have is a thing that will be running our Django app. And I'm going to use gunicorn for this project. It is a very popular Python web framework that we can utilize. So we'll have that as the thing that actually Heroku is running. So it'll be something like this, is really going to be the setup. All right. So there are a couple of major functions that actually we're going to be using in Heroku. So this will be the web portion of this. So I'll just call that web. But there is another aspect of this project that we will use Heroku for. And in fact, I'm just going to take all this stuff, copy it, put it over here. This isn't quite an accurate view, but it'll be close enough. So Heroku has a functionality called a scheduler. The scheduler allows you to run code at a particular interval of your choosing. In this case, we're going to take, will actually be running Django directly using a Django management command. If you don't know what those are, don't worry about it right now. It doesn't really matter. So the scheduler is going to run this. And what is it going to do? This is going to interact with our the email service. So I don't want to be setting up email directly. I would have no trust as an email sender. So any emails that are sent from here would likely go to a spam. So there is something called an email service provider. There are tons of them on the market, but I'm going to use one that I've used in the past. And so that service, I guess I'll drop it maybe over here, and just put it as a box like this, will be SendGrid. I don't remember if I've capitalized that properly, but this is the basic idea. So SendGrid is the tool of choice, and I want to do calls to SendGrid. Vande Mataram. I don't even know what that means, Haranme. I'm assuming that's like a good evening or something, but welcome. Good to see you back. So we're going to say do actual email sending to SendGrid. And the way this is going to work is that so I said that this is a daily service. The idea behind this is every time you want to do a journal entry, you're responding to a single email, so it'll always show up in your inbox. So there'll be a daily email sent for every account. Okay? So that this scheduler thing will be configured, I guess we can put the frequency in here, to run daily. And I'll show you how to do that. It's pretty straightforward, but and this chunk of code is going to loop through, Sarat, welcome. It's going to loop through every account that is in the system, and it will do a lookup to the database, and it will look for a previous entry, and it will pick one randomly and put that in the body of the email. And it will include the prompting that goes along with it of like, hey, tell us about your day, something like that. Excuse me. So we will do that personalization for every email and then send that data to SendGrid, and SendGrid will then send it to the email address that the system has on file. And that will show up in your Gmail inbox or whatever email provider you happen to use, and you will respond. Well, I'm going to use you, assuming that you would be an account user, but a user will respond. So what will happen on a response? That's like, so the sending with the API with these commands is the outbound, but there's a certain inbound processing that needs to happen. Samed, welcome. Thank you for joining in. So we're going to have, and at this point, we'll just say, let's change this to DNS registrar to just like internet. So when you respond to an email, what it's actually going to do, there will be a reply to field that will actually come back to SendGrid. So there will be some kind of data coming back. So this is like, there's an arrow there. In fact, we'll say email inboxes. Kind of, I don't really like how this this is not an accurate representation in a lot of ways, so don't put too much stock on this, but you can conceptually think that SendGrid is doing all of that work. But this arrow back to SendGrid here has no way to come back to our schedule. This is a one-way direction here. When we're sending API calls out, SendGrid doesn't know how to contact the Heroku scheduler. It's not going to do that. So instead, what's going to happen, in fact, I need to move this now because it's not really well positioned. Let's move it up a little bit. Okay. And I'll bring that down. Okay, good enough. So there's going to be another arrow where SendGrid is going to call back to my site. So there's a way to set up a webhook that you can use that for different events that I want to pay attention to. SendGrid can send that information back, and my web application can respond to it. So the flow is you get a prompt for a daily prompt that goes out, and that comes into your email inbox. You do a reply. The reply goes to SendGrid directly. because they are the reply to address. And then SendGrid, once it has received that information, can be configured to send to a particular webhook, and that webhook will be a route in the Django application that will be listening for any incoming requests. And we have to do some stuff to make sure that that's secure, so we're not just getting like random spam from other people who are trying to use that endpoint. But what will happen is that email response will actually come in and look like web payload. And so Django will receive that data in terms of like an HTTP post request, and will process this and be able to store it in a database. And I guess I have not included, all of this stuff is on Heroku. Heroku can actually host databases, so you can think, this diagram's getting a little messy, but you can think that there's going to be a database that kind of lives in between here. Yeah, those are connected. So, and then that would be, I don't know, there we go. So some sort of database that like Heroku has connected, which we'll use PostgreSQL for. So this is like the whole app. Well, that's not the complete story. So what else do we need to make a successful SaaS? There needs to be a way to charge people who want to use this. This is not going to be a free service. I'm not doing this completely out of the goodness of my heart. Although I would like to offer a service that people find valuable, but I have to be able to charge for it. So I need some kind of payment gateway. Payment gateway is somebody else who knows how to do charging stuff. I'm going to stick with Stripe because I've used it many times and I'm familiar with it. Samad, is there a reason why I chose Heroku? I am choosing Heroku because Heroku is a darn good tool. Heroku made a recent decision in sometime last year. Actually, it was on my birthday. It was November the 28th. They decided that they're going to kill off the free tier for their hosting service, which is sad. I think it makes it so that Heroku is not as accessible for those unless they're ready to commit. But I am ready to commit to this thing. I did some pricing, and the costs to me would be, in order to break even for a year, I would need about 8 customers at the price point that I'm thinking. So I'm thinking that this service would be a $5 a month service, not crazy expensive, but it's about a coffee in the United States anyway, or one of those fancy coffees maybe. I don't know if my regular coffee costs that, but a small, nominally small amount. And if I can have 8 people sign up for the service, I would just about break even, maybe make like $30 in profit for a year. So definitely not like a full-time job by any means. And that cost comes from 2 primary areas. Heroku itself, for my other service that I run, which is going to have a similar deployment configuration as my homeschool service, costs me about $16 a month. That includes the web worker, the amount of the scheduler that I use, and then the database costs. Those are the 3 primary areas of cost. And then the actual real expense here was the plan that I would need with SendGrid, since I'll be doing a bunch of email, is about $20 a month. But with that setup, in theory, I could scale. I did the math about how many emails I could get. I could scale up to about 3,000 users. Now, I have basically zero expectation that I'm going to reach 3,000 users. I would honestly be happy if there were 20 to 50, and then make a few $100 a year. That would be awesome. But start with the ambitions being small, and it's also meant to be able to show each of you, how does a project like this work? So we know we need a payment gateway, and the payment gateway will be able to track customers. It will do the regular billing. It will do all of the credit card management. I don't want any of that stuff on my servers, because as soon as you get into the world of credit cards and that sort of things, there are laws and compliance that you have to address, which is why payment gateways exist. They're the ones that are dealing with all of that nasty law stuff related to money, and you just get the service, and they take a percentage of each charge that happens. So we have an email provider, a payment gateway, a hosting service. Those are the main elements that are there. Everything else is, I think, work that we will do. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I can think of. Oh, there's probably a couple more. So we'll need to have some sort of error management tracking service. If there are any problems on the site, we want to be able to see them and not have them fail silently. So I'm going to stick with the service that I've been using again. I'm going to go back to the same services that I like because there's nothing super special about this. In fact, I think as you go on your journey of building a product yourself, if you've built multiple of these, you will find a set of tools that are great to reach for. And if it isn't broken, why fix it? Is the old adage. So that's will be for error management. We might want a little bit of stuff. I don't know how. I don't think we need to get into any more than that. That's probably everything I can think of at the moment. We will be using a number of open source packages beyond Django. I'm not going to go into all of them today, but each one of them will contribute a part. We'll need some stuff for account management and all of that. We will then need to model different aspects of this app using Django's built-in tools and have some kind of user interface. So I should note the UI design. There's multiple ways to build UIs. Bill, welcome. Hi. If y'all are joining in and you have never joined me before, please ask any questions about Python or Django or anything I'm saying. I'm happy to try and take a pause and answer them. Also, give me a like and comment, all that sort of stuff in the future, and subscribe to keep up with me. So what I was saying is we need to have a UI, and there are lots of ways to build user interfaces. You can do full JavaScript clients, so that's sometimes called an SPA, single page application, where you make a full JavaScript app, and then you have an API on the other side that is actually like giving the JavaScript app the data. That is one mode. And then another, so that's like a pure separation between the back end and the front end, and they're talking to each other. That's not what I'm going to do, because what I have found with these small projects where it's just me running it, the amount of overhead of maintaining both of those things and trying to keep them in sync is a lot of work. Instead, what I'm going to be using is a server-side rendered approach, and that is going to be using the standard stock Django templates. Django templates are a great tool. They are not perfect, but they're fantastic for so many uses, and we will use them for our project. Okay, what else do we need to know about? Stuff's going to go on GitHub. I'm going to use a somewhat open source license. So I'm going to do probably, since I'm sharing this with y'all, I'm going to do the code open, but it's going to be, what's it called? A business software license, BSL. It's essentially the idea that the code is free for you to use and look at, but I don't want people like directly taking the repository and trying to stand up a competing service. So it's kind of there as a protection of, if I'm really turning this into a product that's going to live on the internet, it would be pretty shameless if you were to just like take my code and try and steal it as your own, as if it was uniquely yours. I'm happy to teach you and I'm happy to share the stuff, but there's a limit to my generosity. Phil, I'm going to look at your question here. How do you update an object who has M2M fields? So that is a pretty detailed Django question. The broad answer is there is a many-to-many relationship manager, which you can add things to as a set. Like if you're adding a connection that didn't exist, you would call that many-to-many manager and say add. I'm drawing a blank on all the specifics of that that interface. That's pretty well documented in Django. If you want to, well, it depends on what you're trying to do, Phil. If you're just trying to like update the fields, you're right. Just call the save method on it is the correct way. But when you want to make additional relationship connections, that's where I'm talking about. You need to call this manager that has these add. It's almost like set kind of methods. There's some add and remove stuff. So take a look at the docs and you should find that out. Okay. Does anybody have any questions about this design? If you do, drop them in the comments. Otherwise, we will get to the actual coding stuff. And when I said I'm starting from scratch, I'm like legit starting from scratch. We're going to go to GitHub and create a totally empty repo. I'm not, there's probably ways that you can bootstrap yourself by using some kind of template that that gives you a bunch of packages, but that's not an experience that I don't do this process enough to want to like have a cookie cutter kind of stamped out version of this. That's not a bad path though. So in fact, I think there are even tools out there like Django Pegasus or something like that. That just like if you, let's see, Django Pegasus. There it was. SaaS Pegasus. Yeah. So if you're willing to go pay for something, here's an example where you get the starter. I'm not willing to do this. I'm not willing to drop $250 in because part of this is actually to educate people on stream. My plan, in fact, is to continue using, as I said, the service that I've been using for years has been mostly reliable the whole time. It was really just this month where it had some like a major downtime for a couple weeks, and it came back. So I think I said on Twitter that I was going to start a new project if it didn't come back, but I changed my mind. I want to do it anyway. So I'm going to build this service, and then when I'm finally ready, I will switch over to using my service instead of the one that I've been using. They will be functionally equivalent if I'm doing it right. Samed, let me look at your question here. Do I normally do a Figma design? I don't. That's not my mode. I don't think visually that way. I'm much more of like, I'm much more of someone who wants to. What's a good like analogy? I'm not a potter, so this might be a poor analogy if any of you are potters, but I want to mold something like in real time and think of it like I don't know exactly what I want, and I'm going to like work with it in that moment and try and see it. I do think about the kind of feature set, but a feature set to me doesn't work super well with Figma. I've been perfectly happy with like a checklist. A GitHub issue list has been adequate for me describing the features. And then when I actually get in there and work on the software, that's when I actually start to get up the visual elements. Hopefully that answers your question. All right, so we're not going to start with a starter project, and there might be some really interesting stuff in here. I'm not going to go through this feature list. Looks like the author has done a lot of cool work in here. So if you're looking to bootstrap yourself, go for that. But I'm going to go for a different approach. Let's go to GitHub, and we need to go to my profile because I'm going to create the repository under that. And you go to repositories if you've not done this much before. Maybe you've only cloned things on GitHub, or maybe you don't have much GitHub experience at all. But the process is pretty easy. So we're going to go new. And again, I'm not going to share the domain name that I have picked for this project yet. So I'm going to call my repository journal. And that will be the home for all of this code. And I will say a SaaS journal. This will be, we'll put a README in there. It's going to be a Python project, so we want a git ignore that ignores common Python files. And for the moment, I'm going to pick an open source license. I did say I'm going to change it to one of those other business source licenses, but right now I will stick with the MIT until I change it. So you are free to use this as you will. So we've got this code and we've got nothing in here. Let's get the URL and let's go clone it. So got my project set up over here for homeschool, and I've been doing some of the Python stuff, but we're not going to be there. Let's do the git clone right here. All right. And we can go into this. We've got our setup here. So what steps? I mean, if you're starting from complete scratch and never done this before, that can be fairly overwhelming. There's a certain amount of stuff that I have internalized, but it's been a while, so I might be a little rusty myself. So we'll write down, how do I want to do this? I think I'll just go with what I can think of immediately, and we'll see when we hit a wall. And then we can maybe sketch out the next steps of what are the pieces that need to be there. And I think we can do this a little bit by having a README up, and that we can put some notes down. So let's start with getting the README going, and we'll do some checklist items in GitHub style. So I know that we're going to need to manage dependencies. That is like item number 1. John, welcome. Starting a new project this evening, John, if you're just joining in. So we're putting the homeschool project aside for a little while to take a detour to another SaaS that I'm building. So the very basis of a project begins with like, what are you building on top of? The software you're building on top of. And so we need a story to have our dependencies and have our environment and all of that. So that is like step number 1 in my mind. Then I think we could do a little bit of Django initialization, where we could get as far as having a basic Django project set up and going from there. Ultimately, this will need to be handled through gunicorn, as I said. So we need to configure. We need to configure the web server, and there's a bunch to do now that I'm thinking about it. The lists will get quite long. When we actually get to coding later, we're going to need to be able to write some automated tests. One of the aspects of my projects, especially when it's me solo, I need like absolute requirement. I need to be able to test my stuff and have confidence that the changes I'm making are not going to break things. Because if it's the difference between me breaking something and getting an email, like an angry email from a customer, or me just doing the work to test it and make sure it was right to begin with, I would much rather do the latter. So we need to set up the testing configuration for the site. We're going to need to set up, and along with that will come continuous integration. Continuous integration is the way of every time I push a commit, there will be checks that go in place to make sure that the code quality of my service remains high. And kind of paired with that recently is pre-commit. Or recently for me, I guess. Is that even true? No, I've been using pre-commit for years. I just kind of view them as linked together these days, I guess. Pre-commit, if you've never used it, is a tool for running various linting checks every time you're about to commit, before you commit, pre-commit, hence the name. And it will make sure that the stuff that you're going to put in your code is of a certain quality bar before you mess it up, and it can kind of remind you of like, here's what you need to do. So those will kind of pair together. And let's see, what else is going to be important there? So eventually we'll get to some like Django modeling of what are the things that we actually need to build for the product itself. So that'll come up. And once we're through a bunch of those gates, we'll have Heroku stuff. This will probably actually come earlier, even if I'm not ready for it. So this is a good start. In fact, there's no way that we're going to get through all of these this evening. I think if I could get even as far as having the dependency stuff set up and Django configured with a starter project, that will probably be a great point to get to. So we've got our little checklist here, and I think we're ready to go. Step 1. What do we need? We need a set of tools that we can install. So even before any of this, I need to have a virtual environment. So I'm going to put in some notes here in case any of you wanted to try setting up this on your own later. I like to have enough there as reminders for myself, and I'm not going to forget this part, but just ways that I can do stuff, and I might even like copy paste these commands in the future. So we're going to use the triple backticks here, and we're going to say Python 3-m venv. That's going to create a virtual environment. So Python 3-m venv. And this will give us, a virtual environment gives us kind of a scratch space that will keep all of our files localized to this project so we don't pollute the entire operating system with stuff that we've installed. So I need to source that to activate the virtual environment, which modifies my path. You can see how this changed my prompt here. It now says it's on 3.11 and it's inside the virtual environment. So that's good. It's in the right context. Okay. So next step is we're going to need to install some requirements. And so like my fundamental bootstrapping requirements, I like to put in a particular requirements file, which is requirements file is just the conventional name that Python dependencies are stored in. So the command is going to be pip install -r requirements, and I'm going to call mine requirements.dev.txt. So we're going to need that file. That file doesn't exist yet. So let's jump up a directory and go ahead and create it. Requirements.dev.txt. And here I want to use a tool called piptools. We'll just see why in a moment. So we'll do exactly that command that I said we just needed. And that should install piptools for us. Now I'm in my ZSH shell, something I've noticed over the years is anytime I install something and it has a new executable, it doesn't seem to go on my path right away. So I have to deactivate and then reactivate my virtual environment. So that's, if you're wondering like, what the heck is he doing? I haven't figured out how to like source that immediately, so there's not a problem. But I should now have pip compile as a tool that's available to me, and you can see it right there. So the next thing we need is to start listing the dependencies that we care about for what we want to show up on the web server when we deploy to Heroku. So I'm going to bring up the PyPI site. This is where we're going to start looking for the packages that we care about. I'm going to use the latest version of Django. Here it is. Django is at 4.2.1. So this is where we're going to create a different kind of file. What piptools does is it takes the dependencies that you care about, the logical dependencies that you're going to directly use, and it can compile an output file that is the set of transitive dependencies, or the full transitive closure, if you want to use the fancy name for it. But that just means the tree of every library, not only the top level, but all of its dependencies, all the way down. So we want to have that separation because we want to be able to maintain our list of logical dependencies, and that's what we care about. If we want to add to that, that's where we go. And then we want the full transitive closure because we want to be very precise about what we are installing and building for our production setup, because we want a very repeatable practice. If we only use the logical and just left it at the top and didn't include all the dependencies, then there's a chance that what I install on my development machine might have some set of dependencies, and then that doesn't match what ends up getting deployed to Heroku. So by doing it this way, it just guarantees a consistency between the two. Yeah, John, I do use pip update sometimes, but that's actually kind of what pip compile will do for me. It's like every time I run it, it keeps track of those things. And then after I have this in place, I will turn on, if it's not already, I will turn on Dependabot for this repository. And that will help ensure that as it goes for whatever frequency I set it at, that my dependencies will be updated anytime there's a major update. So this is keeping me up to date with the latest software, which is really vital for maintaining a project like this. Okay, So we have this requirements.in file, and we're going to add in Django at, what did I say it was? 4.2.1? 4.2.1. 4.2.1. So that's step one in this process. And then the pip compile command, I think, expects, let's see, what does it want? It wants the options and the source file. So I think we can just do just the source file. Let's try that. Pip compile requirements.in. Okay, so this is printing out a double thing here. It's showing in the console what is going on in the file, but there should also be a new file in here. So there it is right there, requirements.txt. So if we go to it and look at it, it will tell you, like, this is how the file was generated. We ran pip compile requirements.in. And notice here is not only the top level dependency, but you can know, especially with these comments that are there, that ASCII ref and SQL parse are two dependencies that Django needs itself. So this is the full set of dependencies that we require. So now that we have that, well, in fact, before we proceed, let's do a little checkpoint here and make our first commit. So let's do add dependency management. Oh my word, if I can type, with pip tools. And so the flow for adding any new dependency is basically add to that requirements.in file, then rerun that pip compile command and generate the new version of the requirements.txt. Okay, so we have the new file. We're ready to install that and say pip install -r requirements.txt. So we've got our dependencies, and there's nothing to see there because it was added to the virtual environment. But again, I need to deactivate and reactivate because there's should be a new command available. And that new command is django-admin. Okay. So let me make sure that I've captured in the README. So now we want pip install, or you know what, we can get it down to one pip command at this point. So add a second -r for requirements.txt. Okay. Very good. But we don't need to do that for this time because we just ran the requirements, the developer requirements. So pip install r requirements.txt is, oh, I already did that step. Whoops. Okay. So it's time to set up Django to get a fresh instance of it. And so that's where we bring in Django-admin. Django-admin comes with a number of subcommands, and here they are. The one we are interested in is start project. So conceptually, Django is a web framework where you build out a project definition, and then it is composed of what they call Django applications, apps. And so there will be the project with a set of apps that go with it. So you'll see start app will come up next. So we'll start with the project. The start project command takes a few options, and it takes the name of what you want to call the directory and then where to put that. And I want the directory to go in this current directory. You could there's a variety of things you can do here, but that's how I always like it's configured. So pay attention. So this is Django-admin. I've conventionally given mine consistent name of just project. That will be the name of the directory. But you could call yours, I could have called it journal. I could have named it after the project that it's representing. Some people call it settings. No, that's not it. There's some other conventional names that people out there use, but I like to call mine project. J7ST meant you're running behind in pip install version. Oh, that was some message that came up earlier. You're probably right, John. Yeah. Yeah, that little message is kind of not my favorite message here. It's pretty noisy. Anyway, let's run this. And actually, before I do that, is there anything to commit? No, just read me stuff. So Django admin start project dot. What did that do? So if we look, there's some new files in place. There's a manage.py file, and there's this project directory. The manage.py file, which we should be able to look at with this. Oh, I've got a dark theme on, or a light theme on for that, so it's kind of hard to see. Apologies. I got to fix that theme. So let's just look at it with not that. Plain white on black is fine. So this is effectively kind of equivalent to running Django admin, but the thing that this does is that it tries to set up for your local project settings when you're running it. So most of the time, when you're running Django commands, you actually use this manage.py file because it's doing this stuff where it's looking for the right settings. So we've got all of that, and we can add that to Git. GAA is my shortcut to add to the stage. And then we can look at what's in that project directory. There's a few files in here. I'm not going to go over each of them. Most importantly, we've got this settings file, which will be really vitally important for us. So this is generated by Django's default template. And there's a bunch of stuff we need to configure in here. In fact, the README was probably a pre-step here that we need to do configuration via django-environ. It's going to be really critical. We'll talk about that in a minute. So here we've got our list of settings that come with Django by default. It's not a super long list, and it's basically kind of a set of best practices at the time when you're doing this. So that's kind of good enough. I'm going to take all of this stuff and take a look at what. Yeah, okay. Let's go ahead and I like to, at this stage, whenever I run any of these commands that I'm trying to modify as little as possible, or they're generated commands, I like to commit them as they were, because what I don't want to do is run some generated command that has this bunch of generated code and then do a bunch of my changes on top of it. I want to have a clear checkpoint that, I trust the Django developers that they've set this thing up in a way where it is a good starting point. If I break anything, this is a good place to have that checked in. It's just a good practice. So let's commit that and say add start project output. At this point, we should be able to run Django and see it run locally. So Django comes with a development web server, which is under a command called run server. And if we run this, it's going to say, hey, you didn't run some stuff, but then it gives you a location that we can open up. Oh, boo. Apple didn't highlight that very well. Come on. Open selection. There we go. So here we are. We have a successful Django project start. So we're on localhost. That's 127.0.0.1 at port 8000. And we're seeing this because we're running on a debug page and we haven't configured anything. All right. No shocks so far. We are ready to advance. But as I'm thinking about this, I really like I like my safety net that comes with having pre-commit. I was just kind of even feeling a little guilty about it along the way. So there's some other tools that I want to make sure we get set up here. So let's cancel out of here. See, there's no files here. That's good. I'll go ahead and push that up to the repository. So we're kind of caught up everywhere, which I guess if you wanted to clone this stuff and start pulling it down, you could to follow along. You're welcome to try. So what else do I need? So there are common tools that I like to have available. One of those tools is Black, which I just ran. So I've got that configured in my text editor. So I'm going to leave that. And you notice what you may not have noticed actually. So a lot of these things were in single quotes. And just when I saved, it changed all of that stuff to double quotes by default, because that's what Black prefers as in its default configuration. You should be able to see all of that. Yeah. So that's all it really did there. But I want to go and I want to jump to this pre-commit stage. And I'm going to cheat and copy, because I can, the pre-commit file that exists within my homeschool project, because there's no need for me to reinvent that wheel. But I'll walk you through it to show you what kind of stuff is in there. Whoops, copy it to here. And then let's go take a look at it. So we've got some tools that are going to be useful. One of them is this Pi upgrade tool. So anytime we are going to upgrade to a new version of Python, I can bump this and it will take advantage of, do some code rewriting for any syntactic changes that are beneficial out of new Python versions. We've got a similar kind of concept with this Django upgrade. In fact, this should be at 4.2 because we just installed 4.2. Here is some checking for Black. Here is some checking for a tool called iSort, which will sort my Python imports. We've got Flake 8 with this additional dependency of Flake 8 Bugbear, which is something I had. And then a tool for checking for security issues called Bandit. Okay, let's try and run it. I have a feeling that I'm missing some configuration files that is going to make this break, so probably have some other things that we need to pull in. First thing to do is go to that requirements dev file and add pre-commit. Pre-commit is a tool that you can install from Brew, but it is a Python. It's written in Python, so it does come from pip if we wanted to, and I do. Let's install it now. And I recognize this is a lot of information, so I'm just going to stream of thought here. If anything is overwhelming you, let me know in the comments. I'm happy to take a pause, slow down a little bit if I need to. But I'd rather just give you as much as I can so that you can jump straight into your own projects. Okay, so I'm going to deactivate my environment and activate it again so I get a access to the pre-commit command, which I should now have. And I'm going to do pre-commit run-a, which is saying run against all the files that are in this repository. So it's going to set things up, and wow, I was able to do that without any like repo setup. I must have had it from another place. So it's running. It ran Black. It ran iSort OK, but it's complaining with Flake 8. So there's some settings that we have to change because Flake 8 wants the stuff to be 79 characters by default, but Black likes them to be 88. That's just the way Black is. So there's a little bit of configuration that has to go into that. And I want to say that comes with yeah. There's a Flake 8 configuration that we can borrow from this homeschool project. So I'm going to copy again, homeschool setup CFG, and put that here. And then I'm going to run that same pre-commit command. And Bandit is now missing. That's okay. Just means we need to define this Pi project toml, which is where that configuration comes from. So Pi project has a bunch of stuff in it. Oh, there's other tools that are in here that I'm just like forgetting about. That'll come up later. So I'm going to make some notes so I don't forget. Go to our README, and we'll do, when we've got testing, we'll do coverage. And then I'm going to actually, this is going to be a separate activity at this point because I'm not going to set up continuous integration tonight. Samad, you're doing Sublime or VS Code. Yeah, those are good editors. I've been using Vim a long time, so it's hard to get it out of my fingers. So I stick with it. But no knocking anybody else in their text editor choice. I definitely can appreciate how everybody has a different path of what they like. All right, so let's copy over the same PyProject toml, and this is going to be a spot, since like I'm just like stealing from this other repository. If you want to see what's in here and analyze it in depth, I will push up these files and you can go check. This repository exists at github.com/mblayman/journal, and you'll be able to see what's in there if I go too fast on some of these things. So now we've got a bandit configuration in here. There'll be coverage configuration. I'm going to use the same coverage configuration, so even though I'm not using it yet, I'm just going to keep it. Oh, there's type checking. There's a isort stuff. The source paths for this. Wow, what am I going to call that? I think I want my code to live at like the way I structured my homeschool app is all of my Django apps, the actual application code, lives in one Python package directory. A package being a directory that has a dunder init file in its root. And that is a way to kind of isolate the Python code to a single location, because I'm going to use a mono repo for this whole project. So if I've got front-end code or other kinds of code and documentation, I don't want it to just be like spread all over the top of the root directory as much as I can avoid it. So I'm going to do that here, of naming this and putting most of my Python code in the journal directory. So John, that's a good question. Does Flake 8 support PyProject at this point? I think if I remember correctly, it didn't. So that might be why I didn't put it in there. I think, and maybe it's changed. Flake 8 PyProject. There was like kind of a big sticking point. The author of Flake 8 didn't want to support it. And it's actually the same author of Precommit. I'm pretty sure he's like, there's a long debate about it. He just like doesn't want to support it. And if you can go read this here, in fact, in case you're interested in all the gory details, his name is Anthony. Anthony can explain to you exactly why he doesn't want to support it. He's got strong opinions about it, and that's the way it's going to be. So that's why I have the setup.cfg file around. Oh, that was interesting. Did it say too heated? Lock this as too heated. Huh, interesting. So you got to keep around an extra configuration file. That's the reality of working with Flake 8. There is a new tool. What is it called? And that might have all of the Flake 8 checks. It's something written. Let's look really quickly. Python Rust linter. It's written in Rust. There it is, rough. This seems to be like, I don't know if it's maintained its popularity. It certainly seems like it has 14.8 thousand stars. So yeah, you can see the comparison here, because it's written in Rust, which is a very fast language. It is able to go do a lot of its checks way faster than stuff. So here, look, notice these are measured in seconds. This is 0.29 seconds, whereas some of these other tools are measuring at 12 seconds, 15, 46, pylons greater than 60. Yeah. Ibra, let me look at your comment here. Let me parse it, make sure I read it carefully before I respond. Trying to build a SaaS website with Django. Okay. And the concept is the website user will enter the link and my website do the magic in the background with some, okay. You didn't actually, cool, I'm glad you're trying to make a website, Ibra. Doesn't seem to be a question in there. So if you have a question, either got cut off or there's more to add. I'm happy to try and answer your question if you've got one, but I just don't know how to respond right now. Do some magic in the background. That's exactly what this whole stream's about, is all about the magic, quote unquote. Okay. Where was I? I was checking out pre-commit stuff. So we need we brought in the PyProject toml file. And that brought in all this stuff. Oh, it brought in all of this. Okay, I can't carry over, in good conscience, carry over all of this stuff right now. So I'm going to delete the MyPy section at least. Is that just going to be a waste? I probably will end up using almost all of this in the future. So yeah, let's just comment it out for now and leave the bits that I think are going to be relevant for making pre-commit work. Oh, okay, you got more here, Ibra. Let me read the rest. Some requests get to a JSON file, and you don't want these requests to be available on your F12 network. I don't know what F12 network means. So if you can you expand? Actually, looks like Sam is asking the same question. What does an F12 network mean, Ibra? Essentially, I mean, if the short version of what I think you're trying to ask is, you need to be able to run your Django website on some kind of hosting. Like if you either have to set up a server yourself and figure out a way to get that connected to a network, or like I described at the beginning of the stream, you connect it with some kind of cloud platform, whether that be Heroku, like I'm going to use, Fly.io, AWS, GCP, Azure, whatever tool you pick that can host your content. YouTube watcher, that's a good question. This is actually not my educational site. Appreciate the question. I'm building something brand new. So we're working on a brand new from scratch repository, and this is why it's got all of these checks of things that need to happen. So I'm building it up from the beginning. And then Ibra, it looks like you're talking about if you've got stuff on your local website, then no one else should be able to get to it. If you're running from localhost, it means that it literally is not broadcasting anywhere else, and should not be accessible to anybody else. Okay, so let's try running that pre-commit command again and see if everything's passing. Oh, no, it's not. Okay, I've got possible hard-coded password. Well, yeah, it is. And this is something we're going to correct in the future once we have fixed the settings and configuration stuff. So I think what I'm going to do is just ignore that commit. There's a way to do that. But otherwise, I think we're done with pre-commit stuff. So we've got this. We've created the safety net that will allow us to make changes a little bit more comfortably. So I'm going to mark that as done, and add all this stuff to Git. All of those files. It's still going to fail. Oh no, it didn't. So here's something. So when you work with pre-commit, in order to make it hook in with Git, this is a part that pre-commit can't do on its own. It has to be configured to do that. So you say pre-commit install, and what it did is it put a file, an executable file, in this .git hooks directory that Git will try and run anytime you try to do a commit. So now you can see it's running all those things. It still failed on that bandit one, so we can tell pre-commit to skip a check by using an environment variable called skip. So we'll just say skip bandit, and then we'll commit. So it should run all the checks, but skip the one you want. Okay, so we've add pre-commit for code quality checking. That's where we're at. And from this point forward, every time I commit, I should have all of these checks run that make sure that I'm being honest. Okay, so we've done dependencies. We've done the most basic version of Django. We saw it run, and it has nothing. It showed you like that splash page, and that was it. So where we could go next is, do I want to go with the configuration? It's probably going to be needed pretty early. Heroku we can save for quite a while later. Sam, you are asking the $1 million question. I've made a SaaS. How do I get people there? That's where you get into the world of marketing. Well, you've acknowledged that even, I guess, marketing. So you kind of have to build up. You either have to hustle and like find people in your local community that maybe go to meetups. I don't know where you live, what kind of environment you're in, but if I had absolutely no kind of online presence, I'd probably start going to local technology meetups, talking to people there, seeing if folks would get interested, give them some kind of early access if I could, if you're aiming to get feedback. But otherwise, I would go to any social media channels that I built up. So maybe you have a website. Maybe you're in Maryland. Oh, not that's where I'm at too. Interesting. Kind of message the whatever communities you've connected with. Maybe that's on Facebook. Maybe that's on Twitter. Maybe that's on what is it, Mastodon, or what's the new one, Blue Sky. And connect to your people and see if you can reach them. Although I guess it depends on what you're building. If what you're building has nothing to do with your local crowd, and like you're building something for an audience that you're trying to make money with, like maybe you're building something for plumbers or electricians or teachers, I don't, whatever your audience is, that can be a way harder job. So I don't really have great answers there. I'm not super successful with that portion of it myself. So I'm trying to build. In fact, part of why I'm building this tool is it's precisely because I feel like I could advertise and market, not advertise, I could market this to my my online presence on Twitter and have some kind of reasonable response. YouTube watcher, thanks for dropping in. Appreciate it. Yeah, Ibra, that's probably a good idea. Is contact some influencers. That's a good suggestion. Find ways to expand your network, I guess, is the most advice I can really offer in any meaningful way. All right, let's move on to the next bit. We need to do some configuration, and we need to talk about the way that Heroku operates. And this is the way a lot of tools operate. So even though I'm speaking specifically to Heroku, this way of doing things will apply to many other cloud hosting sites. But essentially the idea is this. When you're running your application, you need to inject some different settings that are going to vary. Like when I'm running in a development mode versus when I'm running for what needs to be up on Heroku, those are two different things. For instance, maybe I'm testing things out and I don't actually want to be sending emails out to different people. I don't want to be going through SendGrid. So it would be silly for me to be running SendGrid in my developer configuration, but I absolutely want to send that out in my my site when it's hosted on the internet. And I'm going to use a term that maybe you haven't heard before, especially if you're new to this. When we're talking about the live version of a site, many software engineers will call that production. So if I say production and you're like, what was that? I'm just talking about the live site wherever you're hosting your site. So you might have a developer configuration, you might have a production configuration. Maybe you make another version of your site that is meant for a company and like an kind of internal. So you have like a testing or staging configuration is what it's sometimes called. All of these things kind of just have this idea that you're going to configure your stuff differently. And so there are many ways to do this. Some ways people like to have different files that have different configuration. But as I pointed out earlier, there is the settings file in Django. And all of these things currently that you see in here are hard-coded values. Like very clearly they warn here, like, don't do this. This is you're going to have a bad time if you put out this kind of secret key. And like I had Bandit trying to warn me, don't commit this, don't work with this. So we need a way to dynamically set what our configuration is going to be depending on the environment that is running in. In order to do that, well, there are a bunch of ways to do that. The way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to continue using a tool that I've used in the past, and that tool is called django-environ. It's a pretty solid tool at this point. In fact, it may be like not as popular because I don't know that it actually gets a lot of work done on it anymore. But I've been happy enough with it. Let me actually go check. Where is it? It's on GitHub somewhere. GitHub. There it is. Let's see when the last time it was touched. All right, so people are working on it, which is good. So the idea is this. You can inject that dynamic configuration using environment variables. So if anytime you have a process that's running on your machine, I don't know that I can just type env here because I might have some like secrets or something loaded. But you can just, in fact, this skip thing is a good example. So this was a variable that when I wanted to run that commit process, that's a shortcut there. GC is a shortcut for git commit. It meant that during the lifetime of that process execution, skip equal bandit was set in this globally available environment space. And the environment is the set of information that the process is able to access. So the way Heroku operates, and again, many other cloud vendors, is it will run your process, in this case, a web server, which you'll see, and it will allow you to configure it by injecting in environment variables, just like this skip bandit thing. So if you need to change a secret key, if you need to set API credentials or passwords from some kind of vendor you want to use, then you would set it in the environment variable, and Heroku plugs it in, and then your process can then read it from the environment and get it out. So what this django-environ thing does is exactly that. It's a way to actually look for the kinds of environment variables that you plan to read out from the environment. And then it does some extra stuff. And the extra stuff that it does is it wants to change the data type into what it comes from the environment. It just has to be a string of bytes, and convert that into whatever native data type you need. So here's a good example. A debug setting that you would want to be a Boolean value. In other words, it needs to be true, false. So you'd set this as what you want to cast it to, and set a default value here. So this environment tool is really useful for changing these kind of settings. So we're going to follow along with some of this stuff, or I might go back and look at the homeschool project and try and get that. Ibra, you have some other comment here. Oh, okay, you're chatting with Sam. So cool. Glad y'all are engaging over there. Let me get to how we're going to add this in. So I said earlier that anytime we need to add a new requirement, we need to do a couple things. We need to go to requirements.in, and we need to add to here. So this project is named django-environ, and the version is 0.10. Django-environ. And 0.10.0. JB Era or Jabira, I don't know how to say your handle. Is it recommended to set environment variables permanently on the system? I would not recommend to set them permanently, but I will show you. It's a good question, Jabira. I'll show you the technique for like the way you manage that locally. There's some conventions around it, and it's actually even kind of shows here if you can. So I'm gonna go get this installed. So remember, we have to do it's a two-step process to do in requirements here. We have to put it in the in file and then do that pip compile command to get it actually generated. So now we've got this new dependency added. Now, Django environment didn't have any sub-dependency, so it just added that one, but we still need to go through that process. So then we want to pip install the requirements file, which should give us access to, so this Django environment package is now installed in the local virtual environments site packages directory. Okay, from here, we can go to the settings file. So let's return there. And we want to import environ. That's the name of the package. That was a tough word for me to say for some reason, environ. So this is a third-party package. So in terms of a sort order from isort, I want to put it after standard library stuff. So we're going to put it right here. And then we've got it. And then we need to create the env object. That was what they showed in the documentation. And then you set all of the environment variables that you expect to come out of this with their defaults. Okay. So I have some philosophical thoughts on setting this that I kind of go back and forth on a little bit, but I'll describe the thoughts. My main thought is this. I want to have this set up in such a way that what I deploy is going to assume that it's a production oriented first. And that if I want to make configuration changes, that I would override those locally. The flip way to view this is you could say, actually, no, everything's going to be development oriented first. And that if I want to make something to ready for my production setup, I need to go set that. The reason that I choose this production-oriented first is that means I'm thinking about the right configuration for the final destination. Because, like, really, in terms of having a project, production is what matters. Your live site with your actual customers, that's what truly matters. If you mess up your development site, you can live with it, you can correct it, but messing up your production site can have consequences that you'd have to deal with. So when I'm setting all of my settings, I try and put my defaults to be towards what does production need. And then if I need to override that for my developer setup, then I make sure that my dev setup files, which we'll talk to about Jabira's question, have all of the necessary overrides in place. This should make a little bit more sense in a second. So the first thing we need is, just looking down the list, we're going to have a couple of things here. Debug, true, security key, secret key are things that we need to come from the environment. So I'm going to set them. In fact, I think what I'm going to do here, because this is going to be a lot of stuff that matches pretty similarly with the homeschool app, is I'm just going to bring up my homeschool app's settings files, and we're going to steal from there pretty liberally. So let's do a vertical split, and we'll go up and go to homeschool project. Whoops, not a vertical split. I wanted a horizontal split. Split up homeschool settings. Nope, homeschool project settings.py. Okay, so here you can see it played out. There's a bunch of stuff that I'm going to pull in later. We're not going to worry about nearly all of this today. A lot of this isn't even necessarily relevant to what we need. But what we do need today, for sure, is to set up the debug setting like that. And I also want to set up the secret key. Where is it? What? Secret key. Oh, I didn't even, you know what? I didn't even put it. So for things that you want to be mandatory, this is like when you want to have a default that has a different value. But things that you need to be mandatory, you just kind of say, you declare it later. And if it doesn't have it, it's going to fail. So this is actually a really good, another good principle to think about. When you're running your application, fail early if you can. Because let's say you did something like this, where you had a secret key and you set that to be a string type, but you give it a default value of an empty string. This is a bad idea. Don't do this, because what's going to happen is, I'm going to just copy this for a second. So what we would ultimately want is something like this. And if you've done this, you've now essentially, and Django might protect you here with some safeguards, but you've potentially left your secret key as an empty string, which means like it's not going to be able to use, the secret key gets used for like password hashing and a bunch of salting on stuff and various security protections that you need. So you need a secret key, and it needs to be a unique value. And if you had this with a default value here that's this empty string, then you're allowing the configuration to proceed, but it's going to fail on you downstream in potentially a catastrophic way. Again, Django might be like protecting you from that in the particular case of a secret key, but you could think of like a bunch of API keys or any kind of sensitive setting. So if you absolutely must have a configuration value, then force yourself to define it by, and in this case, not including it at all. So let's watch what happens, in fact, if we do this. So for the moment, I'm going to try, and now we've set it this way. We've got debug. So let's set env debug. So this is the way you use this. So you have this env object thing, and then you call it, like, I guess it's callable, and you give it the setting that you want to get out of here, and that's how you map them to the Django settings. So now that we have that in there, if I try and run manage run server like we had before, this should blow up. Okay, which is good. This fail early advice is what you want. So what's happening is, what would happen in this case, like let's say we did this with Heroku, and I tried to deploy my stuff to Heroku, but I was missing a setting. By having this fail, what Heroku would do, it would say, it would run through the deploy, and then would try to start up your web server, and the startup sequence of the web server would fail. And Heroku would note that and be like, deployment failed. We cannot successfully start this process, so we're not going to put out this new version. So it's kind of a way to protect yourself and make sure that everything is configured properly. It will save you a ton of headaches down the road if you take this strategy. So definitely do it. All right, so now how do we actually make use of this? You can see that I have this here, this chunk of code. And this is what I need to check if this is still necessary. So it's possible that that this is not needed anymore, because there's this chunk here. So maybe it can work with unconditionally reading this now. I'm going to try to do this in the way that's described in the documentation, see if it works. If not, we're going to take this code that I have in my homeschool project. So first thing we want to try and do, and Jabir, this is your question about like setting it. Should you set it permanently on the system? There's a convention of having this .env file. This is a file that you do not, let me repeat that, you do not want to add this to source control, because it's a place where you can store local settings and passwords, and you can have your development set up to essentially have an environment that can be read off of a file and allow you to run. This is good if you need to, let's say you need to test out a SendGrid, or you need to test out Stripe, and you want to put in real testing keys or API keys, then that's where that would be there. Yeah, git-ignore file, I'm hopeful, in fact, let's go confirm. The git-ignore file probably may already have this in here. env, maybe not. There it is. Yeah, so it's already saying, hey, if we find this file, we are not going to commit this thing. So that's good. So I want to take this environ, and I want to do env read env, and I want to try and do this directly of base dir, which I guess is after this, so I gotta move this, .env, like this. I've tried this in the past, and it had not worked. You know what, let's just move this down. Let's leave the base dir at the top. Because what would happen is when the env file wasn't there, like which would be the case with Heroku, it would blow up and complain like, can't find this file. But maybe they've made that, maybe they've changed that. That's now just a safe operation, and we'll just not having a problem. Or maybe I did it because it was dumping out like some kind of warning of couldn't find an env file, which is irritating. So let's check. Let's see what happens. So it still is missing the secret key. Okay. It didn't put out that warning, so that's good. So let's now go through, and we're going to create an env example file, something that we can commit, because something about this env process is like if you're starting up on a new machine, you need like a little template of what are the environment variables that I actually need to care about and configure. That would be possible to find them all in the settings file and like pull them out, but it's kind of a pain in the butt to do so. So what we can do instead is create a .env example is usually what I see it called as, and then we can put the necessary stuff in here. And in this case, I want to have debug equal to true, because that's, you know, I'm going to be using this when I'm in a local development mode. In fact, we can look at the homeschool project and see the example. So, debug on. I'm sure true false works as well. See, here's the secret key. It's a string. So let's use the same secret key here. Let's delete the space. And so now we've got our secret key as well. So now this should work, and I should be able to remove this Django insecure thing. So technically, like my local development setup is still just as insecure. I would be using this this secret key, but that's okay. But now I've moved it to configuration. So if when I do ultimately deploy to Heroku, I have to define this in the environment, and I have to give it a real secret key. I'm going to delete this comment. I don't need that. And then I'm going to delete this security warning because I just made that configurable as well. So here's an example where I'm biasing towards having a production-minded configuration. I want, and everybody should want, to have the debug setting be set to false by default. You do not want to have debug on in production. It's very easy. Generate any kind of 404 page. You can just write junk in the URL for your domain and hit enter. You get a page that's going to come back, and if the debug setting is on, it's going to say, can't find this route. Here are all the routes, and here are all the settings that are a part of this, which may include all your passwords and stuff. So definitely do not run with debug set to true in production. But we've avoided that problem by splitting this out this way. All right, so we've got our env example file, and we can now copy this env example file to be .env. We do want to commit the env example file, so when you're thinking about the example file, of course, never put real secrets in there. It's just junk that you don't care about. I often will put like fix me, replace me, change me, something like that in the values that you care about, and just try and leave them as much as placeholders as much as possible. Okay, so now if we run the run server command again, we're back to where we needed to be. So that's the kind of the core idea of running settings with Heroku, and I'm pretty confident that this is true of a lot of other services. I'm drawing a blank on other services that I've experienced this mode with. I can't remember if Fly.io was the same way or not. I want to say it was, but I could be wrong on that. What was the pleasant surprise is I didn't need to do that existence check. So when I wrote the homeschool app and started it a couple years ago, I had to add that check to see if the file was there because it was doing weird stuff if it was not. That's why this stuff was here. Glad that's been cleaned up, so it's no longer required. Makes for nicer code. You know, honestly, some part of me is like, why don't they just include it in the env thing? Whatever. No, not my project. I'm not going to be super critical of them because it's a good tool. Okay, so what do we still need to do? Probably should go through here and look at each of the settings and decide, is this something that should be part of our Django-environ settings? Allowed hosts is a good example of that. So in fact, I'm just going to take straight from here. I'm going to take the allowed hosts from the version that's there. Allowed hosts I'll have as an empty list as the default so that it will fail. Again, this is a production orientation. We want stuff to fail. And if allowed host is empty, then Django, when it's set to a debug false setting, will not be happy with this. Allowed host is a security control that makes sure that that you're running in a place that you specify. You want a host that matches your domain name. Again, I don't have one yet, and I'm not going to share it until I do, because I don't want somebody snatching up the domain name. So we need that. And then I think when, let's see, what is that in the example? Yeah. When it's in the example configuration, we want it to just be star. And that basically says allow any host, which is totally fine for development, in my opinion. Although some people might argue that even development should be like local host or something like that. But you can read the rules in Django about if you have the star, basically what IP addresses it's allowing, and it's the stuff that you would expect of localhost and 127.0.0.1 and whatever the IPv6 version of that is. Stuff like that. Okay, so we've got that. We now have this in the example. We got to remember to put it into the actual env file that it's going to be read from. So let's continue down our scan down through the settings file. So we've got installed apps, middleware. We're not going to change those right now. Our root URL configuration is correct. I'm not going to touch the templates yet. There will be a change that needs to happen to there later. This comment is not super useful to me, but that's okay. Okay, those are all fine settings. It's going to be an English site. You want your time zones to be in UTC. You want to record stuff in UTC as much as possible. It's kind of sad that those has to be explicitly stated. Static files and default autofield. Okay, all of those settings are good and can remain as just static configuration. There are more settings that we will need. A bunch of these things that are up here are related to security and doing stuff securely. So that will be useful. Some of this, like this one, is for the web server. Maybe we'll get to that in a minute. But I think we're good for now. So let's take a look at what we've done. We did our environment example. We've got our couple things. I guess I need to modify the README. We're done with that for now. And the README is going to be this configuration stuff. That's done. And then we've got our Django-environ class and our object. We've replaced some settings with the environment version. And then we've got our dependency there. All right. Add Django-environ. And again, if you're playing along, I just pushed up the code if you want to pull down those newest changes. All right. At some point, I'm going to run out of steam with all of this, but I will continue on for a little while longer. see how much we can get through. Just realized I must have taken out the T on integration. Let me think for a minute what I want to do. I mean, the most logical thing would be just work down the list. Okay. Let's keep going down this list. When operating, there's two, well, I'm sure there are multiple schools of thought. There are at least two schools of thought on running your Django app. Yeah, John, you're right. I didn't want to touch DB settings yet because I didn't want to set up Postgres or think about that, but that's a good point. I think there are a couple of prevailing schools of thought when it comes to running Django. So one school of thought is, let me use run server. Run server is a cool tool. It's a development tool. It's a little local web server. And it's a pretty nice experience. It can run the system checks, which we're not going to talk about, but it does those, and checks for other things. My personal take, though, is that I want to get my local development environment to be a little closer to what it's like when I'm running on Heroku. And the Django web development server, for all of its good qualities, is not a production-ready server. You do not want to run server on your site. Like, it might work okay, but even the docs will tell you don't do this. So instead, what I like to do when I'm running is to use my actual main server, gunicorn, which I've mentioned, and run that locally instead. So instead of doing any of this, we would run gunicorn. So let's start to set that up. All right, so step one in that scenario then is to get gunicorn ready to go. So we're going to go to our requirements.include file, and let's go over to PyPI and look for gunicorn. Let's see what version they're on. We've got gunicorn version 20.1.0. So gunicorn, I spelled it wrong, corn equal 20.1.0. Now we do our pip compile loop again. And we've got all that stuff. It looks like gunicorn doesn't have any dependencies, which is nice. And then we can do pip install on those requirements. And we've got gunicorn, which I had cached locally because I was working on my homeschool project. So very quick to download that package. I'm going to deactivate and reactivate again so that we get access to the gunicorn process command. Not a process. It's just a command, not a process command. Or maybe I'm being redundant. And it's time to get a little closer to the Heroku configuration. And here again, I'm going to copy. There's no point reinventing this wheel. I'm going to copy from the homeschool app and get the configuration that I need. So there's a couple of different files that I need from homeschool, and they're both called proc files. So there's two of these things. So we've got this, and we've got the dev version, and I'll go remember why they're different in a second. So what are these things? This is specific to Heroku, but it's the commands that Heroku needs to run in order to know what's running on the web or what's running on these other things. So let's take a look at one of them. There's two things in here. One of them is a special thing, and the way to read this proc file is like every line in here is something that Heroku will run. So you might have web, you might have a worker thing that is some long-term process that would go there, but you can read this as each line is a single thing. So this release line, though, is special, is a thing that during the deployment process, when it gets to the end, it's going to run this release command. That name is special. If it finds a thing in the proc file named release, it will run that. So we will run the manage migrate command every time we run. So the way this is working is basically, let's say I've made a model change, I have a new database migration, which might not mean a lot to you if you don't know much Django yet. But I've got new state changes about how my tables are supposed to be. I have new tables I want to add, new columns, whatever. The release command will prep the database and do that work first, so it sets up those new tables. Because Django makes an assumption that when it connects to the database, every table, every column that it needs that matches up with its models are already present. So by putting this release command in this proc file, you guarantee that before your new web process starts up, that the migration will happen. So that's useful to have. And then we have here the actual web server configuration. Now, because I use a conventional name, my journal project has the same directory structure, so it's project.wsgi. There is a project.wsgi file here, right here. So this is the entry point that the web server is going to hook into Django to start getting things running. There's a little bit of configuration here that I've got, which is setting the number of worker processes that I want, and a log where I want my log file. And by saying dash, I'm saying write all of my log data to standard out. All right, so those are a couple of important bits. There are probably some other things that we need out of here. So I'm going to bring up that split again with the settings, and we'll look for some stuff that needs to be there. I know off the top of my head that, and it's only because I saw it in here recently, is this thing. Gunicorn somewhere along the way wants to buffer, or Python by default will be trying to buffer input. So it means like you wouldn't necessarily see your log files out with Gunicorn. So by setting this particular environment variable, it allows Gunicorn to bypass that and dump out its information immediately as it gets it. So I want to steal that setting and put it in my env example. That's Python, so it's element op that goes here, and we also want to put that in the env file as well. Okay, so that's kind of getting Gunicorn set up for when it's time to push this to Heroku, which is nice. This is like almost the entirety of the Heroku setup from a configuration file stuff. It's not quite true. There's a little bit more there, but it's pretty close. Then we have this stuff here, and I think the only difference here, maybe we don't need this yet because I don't know when I'm going to get to this front end piece. So for the time being, I'm actually going to delete this file. Yeah. We'll delete this file for now. Okay. The next thing I want to do is I want to copy over a make file that I use from my homeschool stuff and put it in here because it's going to be the target that I want to get started. So we have this make file in here now. And really, the things that I want to keep, a bunch of these things will probably be useful in the future. I don't know how I'm going to do. Yeah. I don't need that. We don't need documentation right now. I'll keep the test stuff. I'll keep the graph stuff. Like most of the stuff, we'll comment it out for the now, just as a signal to me that I don't really need it. But what I'm really after is this part right here. And let's get rid of this docs thing. There's Heroku comes with a set of local tools to use, command line tools that I've already installed. And by running with the Heroku local command, it's going to use the proc file to guide like what processes to start. So as you saw with this proc file dev thing, there were multiple rows in there. There was the web one, but I also had that front end thing. And that front end thing was for when I needed to do CSS changes. I needed to have a process that was running, which we're not going to get to tonight. But that would be useful. So I should be able to just do Heroku local for now, and we should see this work. Jabira, let me look at your question here. Will I be using a front-end framework? My plan, yeah, you might have missed the beginning of the stream. Good question. Let's go back to the Excalibur. My plan is to just do server-side rendered stuff. So here are the basic components that we're going to be doing. We're basically right here, right now. We're not going to get to the scheduler tonight. I don't know that we're going to get to any of the database, or even, a lot of these boxes are not going to be done. But you can see the list of features that are going to go into here. We've already set up GitHub, and the UI stuff will have to come later when we start to set some of the routes and views and stuff. And yeah, there's just a bunch of things to do. I guess maybe one of the lessons here, like, at the very beginning of this process, I said, I'm not going to pay for some or use some bootstrap thing. And this is where you can see the cost of that. Like, I'm doing real-time configuration of the basics of a Django project. And it's not the most exciting work in some sense, because I've done it a bunch of times over, and it's just like going through the list again. So I could see, if I worked at a consultancy and had to do this for a bunch of clients, I would absolutely want to put this in some kind of thing that's all of my refined opinions that I could quickly just spin up here's my own opinion to take on what goes into a Django project. In fact, there are a number of these that are available. I showed SaaS Pegasus, but there's a number of free ones. I think if you listen to Django Chat, one of the hosts there, Will Vincent, he has his own. There's a cookie cutter one out there too. So there's like a handful of like predefined kits that are out there. But I want to go my own way. I want to have my own opinions on what technology I'm using. So that's what I'm going with here. Oh, you've been trying to use the cookie cutter one. I'm curious, how's the experience with it, Jabira? Is it any good? I think I've looked briefly at it, but I don't remember it's been like years since I've inspected it. But if it saves people time, more power to you. Okay, so we've got now a make file. I should be able to run make, and the way make works is like whatever is the first, each of these names with a colon is called a target. If you've never done make files yet, or have never done make files before, and if you run makefile without listing a target, it's going to run the first one. So if I just run make, it's going to run this Heroku local command and try and get things going. And Heroku local noticed that there's a .env file. Now my code will also notice that, so it doesn't really matter that much. But it loaded the .env file. And then where it goes to next is it says, okay, I'm starting up this process. There's a difference here. It's running on localhost, or this is, we'll talk about the 000 in a second, but it's running on port 5000 instead of port 8000 like the Django web server. But we should be able to see the same thing, same output. Okay, so there's one big notable difference there, and that's the use of 0000 as the IP address. This is the broadcast address, I think it's called, broadcast IP. I think y'all can, if I'm wrong on the name of that, you can correct me. But essentially, yeah, in fact, let's look. Broadcast IP. Anyway, the short version is that by using this IP address, it's like available to any listener, like on the network. So in theory, somebody in my home right now, because I'm using the broadcast IP address, if they found the IP of my Mac right there, they could connect to it and see my website. They don't. None of my family cares about that or has any interest in doing that, so they're not going to. But that's the effect of what that would be. Whereas localhost is called the loopback address. So it means it's like never going to actually going to the network card. It's staying within the operating system and will not be accessible to anybody else. So that's what that's all about. I'm trying to remember if there's any other configuration that I need to pull to make this right. We've got the Python unbuffered stuff. I don't remember. There a gunicorn config, or did that get pulled into the? I think in the past I've had a gunicorn config file, but I don't see one here. Coverage, config toml, what are you? Oh, that's for Hugo, which we're not going to use. Yeah, we might be done. Cool. All right, so let's go back to the README, and we now have our new web server configuration. Actually, hold on, there may be one thing. So when we're now using a different server, and the advantage of using the run server is that it has certain knowledge about its configuration. So when you have debug set to true, the Django knows that that means something. So it can detect that and make some different action based on that. Whereas gunicorn doesn't quite do that. So, and that really comes into play when it comes to templates. So I remember there was a change that happened with a recent version of Django that I had to add, and I need to go see to add to this project so I don't get bit by it later. If we scroll down here and go to the templates section, we need to check for something. Here it is. And you can see I left myself a big long comment to remind me what happened. But essentially, it will not reload your templates in the same way that it used to, which is a little disappointing. That I have to go have this little magic section, but it's okay. I'm okay having that. It's not that much. So this is definitely an area where you might want to go check out what I'm doing here. Let's go to templates and put it after here. And so now I should get template reloading automatically. And so the way that works, and why is that necessary? It's like because I'm using gunicorn as my development tool, most of the time it doesn't want to do that. Like you don't actually want to reload your templates every time or in this mode because it's slow. Because the normal these template loaders here, the way they work is when you go to a Django view and it's looking for a template to render, it's going to scan through all of the directories that it has available, and that's a slow operation. Instead, what you want it to do in a production setting is to load all of these templates once and then have them like in memory and accessible and know their location. Because if you think about it, the thing that you're deploying to Heroku, nobody's modifying that. It's already done and built. It's like a bundle. They even call it a slug, is the name of their bundle. So it's pretty set in stone, if you will. And so you don't need to do this like dynamic lookup. But when you're doing development, you absolutely want to do that. Like let's say I've added a new template or I've modified an existing template. When I'm doing my development loop, I want to be able to refresh the page and just immediately have that template update reflected. If I don't have that, then what's the other experience? Then I have to like stop the gunicorn process, restart it, and then refresh the page just to see a change, which is really dumb. So you don't want to do that. And this is a way to get around that. So it's like loading whenever you're doing your development stuff. And which is why that's why I have this guard here. I'll only do that if you're on debug mode. So that's what's going on there. I think that might be it for the web server stuff. So we've got that. See, how much farther do we want to go, I guess is the question. Any opinions on what people want to see next from this list? We could take this a number of directions, but I will probably keep forging on with the list as we have it, and then think on this more in the future. But some of you might have some really strong opinions about what to do next. Okay, so we've got. Let me review this set of changes real quick, make sure it's right. We've updated our environment thing. We've added a makefile that I left some stuff commented out. We did the configuration of the web server. We've got that template handling. And then we've got gunicorn added to our dependencies so that when we finally do build for Roku, it will have that. Jabira, yes, it was. Older Django versions had it by default. They did the template reloading, and I even went down to why did this change? Because it seemed to honestly it seemed like a regression in behavior, and that's when I discovered that the run server mode was still doing the right thing. So if you were using run server, then you wouldn't have even noticed this. And this chunk of code that you see here, these extra lines. They would not have been a thing you had to do because run server just took care of that. And I think you even commented here. Run server works around this in some manner, but gunicorn does not. So that's how I experienced that. It's one of these things where if I was being a good Django developer, I should go in and find some way to fix it. But I haven't found the motivation to go do that. So sorry, other fellow Django devs, I'm failing in that way. Okay. All that stuff was good. There was nothing pre-commit that wanted to do. And we're ready to say add gunicorn. And I'll push that up. Okay. We're a couple hours in. We're not anywhere closer to actually putting it live yet, but that's okay. We don't even have anything I described the service itself, but we haven't done anything related to it. Everything, nothing about what I've done so far is specific to setting up my SaaS project. It's all been generic, and I picked some names that you might disagree on the naming of, but there's no code change here that is truly unique to my SaaS. I guess what is unique, perhaps, is the closest thing that I could call unique is the fact that I chose to do configuration through environment variables. And if you didn't want to do that, then we would have diverged in the way that we're designing the apps. But it's pretty common. All right, what should we do next then? Let's continue on and figure it out. So by default, Django will use manage test, but we have no tests yet. So I'm almost not sure that I want to do tests right away because there's nothing to test. Instead, maybe let's set up continuous integration. Or maybe we just set things up to think about. Yeah, maybe we shift gears. I felt like I've done enough setup that you could follow along if you wanted to do. If you've had your own project in mind, I've gotten you pretty far with what we've covered so far. So maybe it's time to shift into what do I need for this specific project, and what am I thinking about? And this might be a good spot to do some actual GitHub issues rather than that checklist. Yeah, Jabira, so I got to be honest. I see your comment there, and I'm glad you're looking forward to the modeling part. I am not going to be doing anything earth-shattering in terms of modeling, but it's still stuff that's needed. So let's sketch out some issues that are going to be required. what's first? We need some notion of users and account management and all of that sort of stuff. And so there's the Django has its built-in auth system, which is awesome. Yeah, John, we can do some TDD. I don't know that I'm going to get to any like real meaningful code tonight. So I think as soon as we get to the code we're going to add, it's going to trigger the need to go to TDD. So I think that's the way I'm going to do it. So I'm going to describe some of the changes, and we'll probably end the stream here after I get down like a hit list of here are the things we're going to do over the next few weeks. And then we'll do the first one, and it will require doing the TDD stuff, which will require me to go set up PyTest and the things that I need. So there'll be some bootstrapping there, but then we'll be set to go after that. Okay, so again, getting back to Jabir's point, and what's needed for the modeling. And what was I saying? I said there's the Django auth. And if you look at auth, there's the user model. I have seen projects, I've made projects where I took the user model and I added a bunch of stuff to it and made it kind of this like, made it more than it was supposed to be. In my opinion these days, the Django user model should be used almost exclusively for authentication and authorization, and not much else. There are better places to store data related to the user rather than the user model, because the temptation is to put a ton of stuff in the user model and make it into what some folks would call like a God class, which is a class that has too many responsibilities in terms of modeling. So we need to have some notion of tracking users and giving them access. The critical element of this, I mean, like I said, this is a journaling software that is all about email. Like that's the primary UI. So of utmost importance to me is having an account scheme where it's email, password, login. So in fact, I'm not going to put that in the title. So we're going to say set up the auth, and I'm going to reach for Django all auth when it's time. Let's just sketch in some bullets. So we're going to use Django all auth. I'm going to use email and password auth. I'm not interested in other types. I know that people like social auth and stuff, but if the whole point of this thing is to be able to send you emails, then the simplest and most logical, like you're going to have to give me your email address anyway. So just let me have a sign up with an email password set up. Keep it as simple as possible. That will trigger how to actually create, that will go into sign-ins and login pages and all of that kind of business, password resets, all of that. So that's going to be an important first step. So I'm going to mark that as its own like first issue. So that's something we have to think of. Okay. So then, in the process of setting up auth, we're going to have templates that we override. The Django all auth provides like well-named hooks for these are the templates that you want to change. These are the form fields that we expect. Here's the form that you get. But it's your job to write the actual UI for those things. So that's going to, in the process of setting up all auth, we're going to run into the template configuration. Okay. None of this requires any database stuff yet, because we can, the default database with Django is SQLite. We're not deploying anything to the real production yet, so we can continue to work with SQLite without any real fear on that regard. So template configuration is going to come pretty quickly after in just setting up all auth. I'm just kind of like sequencing how is this going to go. We saw the testing stuff is on the README, so we'll get to that too. So that gets us to log in, log out. Then we're going to need, well, what do I really need? We need to, like, if we want to get to the heart of this application, maybe we should get to that sooner rather than later. So we need to do an app that's going to capture essentially the journal entries. What should we call those? I'll just, entries is the name that popped in my head, so it will probably be entries, until I can think of if y'all can think of a better name than entries. That's not my favorite term. Posts, I don't know. Days, yeah, the days is way too generic. But this is like the modeling start modeling the core functionality. And this is where we're going to see that this functionality is not really that complex. So what do we need? In order to work with email, I'm going to treat this, and I haven't decided if I want to like support Markdown or not, or how I'm gonna what kind of data I want to go. But at the very least, if I want to continue like I did with the service that I'm currently using, it basically is plain text with new lines that will be represented. So I just respond to the email. I don't do any formatting. I'm literally just jotting my thoughts. That's the thoughts that matter, not really like how pretty it looks or anything like that. So there's a body text field. This is a daily journal. So there's like the when or a day, I don't know. It's a date field. And then we're gonna need a foreign key to a user. So those are the, like, almost, I can almost say stop there, and that could be the entire model for the core of the application. And it may be the beginning. I might pick a different name for this field. I don't know, but this is what's going to matter. There's probably some better tracking we could do along with it, but if I wanted to have a minimum viable product out, like, that's got to be in there. And so we need an app that will hold that. And we'll have to have, well, do we even need? Yeah, we do. We need like a creation. We need a create page. We're gonna need, I don't know, we'll need a delete page. I'm not sure if folks needed to like delete their journal entries. I don't know. There will look like, I'm gonna let users delete their data when they close their account, but I don't know if I want to have support like, I want to delete this day, because I feel like somebody's going to come back and say like, I want my day back, and sorry, it's gone. So anyway, I'll leave that there. So that's our initial model that we'll use to get started. Then there is, we got to think about like the email stuff. So there's once we have journal entries, then we can actually like send things out. So sending emails to users. That's a whole activity. So it's like a Django management command that can run with the Heroku scheduler. For initially that it can run just once a day, and everybody can get their email at the same time. The service that I currently use says, what time of day do you want to receive your email? And that's actually pretty nice from the perspective of like, if load became a problem. Like, imagine the service was wildly successful, and then I have this thing that runs for a long time at 1 hour of the day. I don't know, that still, it may not matter, because even wildly successful, I remember, well, maybe you might not have been here at the time. I did some costing out on the email plan, and wildly successful would be like 3,000 users. But like we're talking computers. 3,000 is a tiny, tiny amount of people. So maybe it's not a big deal. So sending email to users was a Django management command. That's a thing that we got to do. That's part of the core of the application. Then we need to process inbound email via a webhook. So this will get to like SendGrid configuration. It's going to come out of this. Persisting the journal entry. All of that. And yeah, doing that association. One of the bits that I'm not clear on, I think it'll be pretty obvious, I'm hoping it'll be obvious, is the webhook. The webhook will probably have the who it's from. And I think that's how we're going to look up who do we persist the journal entry for. I don't think there's a way to spoof that because it'll be coming from SendGrid. We'll be able to reliably, we'll be confident in that. But that's that. So that will, just even that much, will kind of close the loop. So we've now talked about this thing, this arrow. We've talked about this arrow, which comes back in here. We're going to need, let's talk about other pieces. So this, after we get that core loop out, then what do we need? So we need to have, a home page. And I'm thinking I want this app to be so simple that when you're, the root of the home page is going to be the marketing page, kind of the pitch that, so there's like an unauthenticated path is the marketing page. The authenticated path is what? The current app I'm using shows the latest entry for the day. That's probably a reasonable point. There is the way that app works is it has pagination, but the pagination is 1. So you go to a previous page and it just shows you the last entry, which is a strange experience for trying to see like old stuff. But I might want to do like a calendar of, I'll show you your last entry, but I'll also give you like, here's the month that you're on, and maybe there's some navigation that we could put in to allow you to like jump to your results a little quicker. Or another feature of my current tool that I'm using, like there's this, I said that part of the whole reason I started this is because there was this downtime, and the way the service processes like what day to associate your entry with is, I'm pretty sure, based off of the subject line of the email that gets sent. Processes out and says like, oh, it's the email title says, May 17th. So I'm going to create this entry for May 17th. Well, when there's downtime and you're not getting those daily emails, then I'm missing blocks of days, and there's no, I might be able to modify the title of the email and the response. I don't know how much control I have over it, or if it's like the original. I don't know what SendGrid does. But it's not really easy to add in an entry for a missing date. So when I have these gaps in the current tool that I'm in, I end up just writing like one really long like mega entry that I block out manually by a bunch of days. And that's really not cool. So there's some like, I mostly want to create the same tool that I've been using, but I want to polish the like handful of sharp edges that I think are in the product that I see today. So the authenticated experience will show your latest entry plus a calendar. Oops, calendar. Probably. Okay. So that's kind of the functionality. We need people to let people pay for it. So there's a get to the Stripe integration. I mentioned earlier that I don't want to use the user model for everything, so I want to create a separate model for accounts. Like I want to create an account concept early on. So add account model, and the account model will be the thing that we link to Stripe stuff. We'll probably end up using DJ Stripe to do these things. Yeah, I might actually, John, so I've thought about it. I might not even like bother with the abstract based user. Like I had it for, well, I don't know. Like with the homeschool app, I did, what did I do? Let's see. I created a user. Yeah. So where are we? Homeschool, and then users. So in this model, I have the abstract user. And I think I did this, like I didn't want the abstract base user. I only created this to give myself the ability to add some methods to the user. But I'm not even sure that I like this. I don't know. I'm torn. I'll think about it. That's for a problem for a different day. But yeah, good call. When we get to the user, we should think hard on that, because that is a decision that is a hard one to undo if I did. So I will probably go with the abstract user just in case, in case I want to do something with it that's more custom. I don't know. So anyway, we're gonna do Stripe integration. That'll be important. We will need to get the Sentry stuff I mentioned. That was on the diagram. So we covered Stripe. We need to cover Sentry. Sentry integration is really not hard, but it will be vitally important. And I learned some things recently. Here's a fun little story. I was on Sentry the other day, and I got some error message. And the error, when I looked closely at it, it was like somebody's local computer. And so here's the consequence of working online, is that periodically folks will clone your repository and try and run stuff. And this person tried to run the local web server, and something wasn't configured. But because I had put the Sentry has this like DSN, which is like public information, so it's not really that private, because you have to put it in things like JavaScript and things like that, so that it's not worth trying to hide. So what I'd done at the time was I hard coded that like right into my code, because I figured, well, what does it matter? But then somebody ran my project and they ran into the configuration problem, but Sentry was running. So it captured that. It saw it had a real DSN because I hadn't put it in an environment variable, and I got an exception for it. I'm like, oh, geez, that's annoying. So I'm not going to make that mistake this time around. We'll do a little bit more advanced Sentry configuration. It won't be that hard though. So got to get Sentry in there, track errors. I don't know. I feel like I'm getting close to like capturing the majority of it. So we've got, there's going to be logic about sending a random entry when we get to the sending, but that's like something we can save for that. Yeah, Jabir, I'm kind of with you. Like, it freaked me out at first. I'm like, what? Nothing. I didn't do anything. What is this error message? And then I read the traceback and saw somebody's like literally somebody's home directory path. It's like, good for them for trying. That's cool. But it was something I need to correct. Okay, I think I've captured all of these things, and this was a pretty accurate list of the basic flow. So I think I'm going to call it there. So we've gone for almost 2.5 hours. You've now seen we've got 8 major items to work through here, a couple more things over here. I'm hoping that I can have a version of the service live by next month or two, and that would give me the chance to like work with y'all. It'd be nice to have some of you be beta users or something along those lines, and see what you think of this experience of writing a journal via your email. I have found it to be a real joy in terms of it's something that grows in value over time, which I think is particularly cool. Which is why I've literally used the service that I am currently using. I've been using it for 7 or 8 years, and you know, it's kind of a habit that gives you some appreciation on your life. Sarath, I appreciate that. Glad you were able to enjoy the stream. Samson, thank you. So I want to thank you all for joining in. If you could do me a favor, leave a like, comment. I'm happy to answer your comments if you thought of something later. If you haven't subscribed already, that would be useful too. And if you want to support me long term, there's a couple of ways to do it. One is like little gifts like Sarath gave there today, a little, what are they called? Super chat. Thank you. Streamlabs for notifying me. And you could support me on Patreon. I have got a Patreon as well. Or you could wait until this service is live and then do a $5 there. And that way you get something and can journal and also support me as well. So help me defray the costs of this, because it will need at least 8 people, as I said, to be a viable service that I'm not losing a bunch of money on. I'm not too worried about making that. I think there's an audience there that people who want to journal, and I don't know. I think it'll be appealing enough to folks. So we'll see. Time will tell. Getting back to that marketing comment way earlier, that'll be the real challenge of like perhaps what the stream will cover is like, well, now what? we built the product. It is there and running. How do we get people to come? And that could be a fun problem to solve collectively too. I don't think I've with the homeschool one. Let me actually, before I go, let me pause. I have enjoyed building the homeschool application. I do it for my family. My wife gets a lot of value out of it. I have a couple customers. That's great. And I will continue doing it. At some point, we'll get back to the homeschool app and finish off. And I'm leaving a feature hanging that one of my customers was asking for. And so kind of taking maybe a 3-month hiatus here in order to do that. But the challenge with the homeschool application is the same marketing challenge that was mentioned earlier by, was it Sam? I'm drawing a blank on who was saying they needed marketing advice. And the challenge is that I don't have good connections into the homeschool community. Like they're a group that I don't feel a strong inclination to go to their conferences. I am not part of a local co-op, so I don't have a good engagement. Every Wednesday, right, John? Maybe it's Thursday for you, wherever you're at. But so I don't have a channel, and having not having a channel means that I don't get a number of trials in here. But I think the difference with a journaling software is like this is a piece of technology and a service that I don't mind letting people on my Twitter account know. I don't mind letting people in the stream know. It's like a generally useful thing, and that general usefulness, I think, will make it just be more interesting of seeing who I can engage with. And I think the other bit about it is like I feel like you, as my dear viewers, can relate to it a little bit better. And if you're trying it out, you can say, you know what, it'd be really great if the service could do this. And we're gonna have that debate because there's a fine line that I want to walk with this, and it's I want a service that is simple to maintain, that I can maintain, that is useful, sends out these useful emails that are of the same quality and caliber that I receive with this other service, and doesn't have every feature under the sun. Because every feature, most of these features, in order to be maximally useful, have to go through email as the user interface. And that's going to mean if I added anything extra, it would be parsing of emails. Not doesn't have a strong appeal to it, if you know what I mean. Email is pretty notorious. There are some thoughts that I have that could be fun to try. Like maybe I could see perhaps like adding tagging or something like that. Maybe if you have a line in the email that says tag, I don't know, mood, tag happy, like there might be some things that could be added that could be useful. But I really want to solve that problem first of like, how do you just get into the habit of writing a journal every day via email and then making that available to a lot of people. Next week, I think I'm out of town next week. Sorry. I would love to be back at this next week, but I'm actually on a work trip, so I won't be able to stream. But when we get back to it, I will be able to share the name of the service. I do have one picked out. I maybe will either share it on Twitter or share it just here the next time I'm able to stream. That I think will resonate with what the spirit of what this is trying to do. I use ChatGPT to help me craft some names, and I found one that I liked. So thanks ChatGPT, I guess. And then yeah, we'll get to more of this list here and the other list over here, and get at it. And I'll probably be able to do some of the. There's going to be some configuration that I'm not going to be able to show you because it's like fiddling with Heroku bits and here and there. But I'll try and be as transparent as I can be to give you the whole experience of building an app from scratch. Anyway, so that's going to call it for me today and this evening. Thank you all for joining in. It's been lovely to have a conversation with you all, and I'll see you next time. Take care.